Space may be cold, but there are few things in the universe hotter than Ishtar. Hello everyone, Saber of FGO Reviews here, with a servant spotlight for Chaldea's #1 space cowboy, Space Ishtar. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over pointers to how to utilize her effectively, and an overall grade, comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 5-star servants. So if you're ready to uncover the mysteries of the cosmos with this intergalactic cutie, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and ring my bell, so that you can catch all of these spotlight videos as they go up, and you can help out the channel. But for now, on to Ishtar's stats. Space Ishtar has a max HP of 13,041 and a max attack of 12,612, which becomes 13,873 due to her Avenger class modifier. There aren't many other Avenger servants to compare her to, but among them she does have the highest HP stat in her class and the lowest attack. However, compared to the other 5-star servants overall, her HP is very below average, while her attack stat is among the highest in the game. When it comes to her command cards, Ishtar has 4 hits on her quick card, 2 hits on her arts, 3 hits on her buster, and 5 hits on her extra card. She has an NP gain rate of 0.69% and a star rate of 6%. Overall, Ishtar's stats are heavily skewed towards offense, giving her more of a glass cannon type of build. And both her base NP gain and star generating are just about average, due to her having a good NP gain rate and quick card, but low hit counts on her arts card. Taking a look at her skills, Space Ishtar's first skill is Devil Sugar rank A. It increases her own attack for 3 turns between 10 and 20%, and it also increases the party's attack except herself for 3 turns between 10 and 30%, both depending on level, and it will also grant other party members charm immunity for 3 turns. Her next skill is Venus Driver rank B. It increases her own NP damage for 1 hit over 3 turns between 10 to 20% depending on level. It also grants her 1 hit of invincibility and allows her to change her NP card type between quick, arts, or buster for 3 turns. And finally, Ishtar's last skill is Multiple Starling rank EX. This skill increases her NP gauge between 30 and 50% depending on level, and it also has an 80% chance to increase her quick, arts, and buster card effectiveness by 20% for 3 turns. As for her passives, Space Ishtar has a ton. First up, she has Magic Resistance rank C, which increases her own debuff resist by 15%. She has Independent Action rank C, which increases her crit damage by 6%. Goddess's Essence rank A++, which increases her own damage by 270 and increases her debuff resist by 27%. Avenger rank EX, which increases her NP generating when taking damage by 22%, but decreases the party's debuff resist by 12%. Oblivion Correction rank A, which increases her crit damage by 10%. And finally, Self-Replenishment Magic rank B, which charges her NP gauge by 3.5% every turn. Moving on to her deck and Noble Phantasm, Space Ishtar has an Arts Buster deck with quick Arts Buster, and an Arts Noble Phantasm. Her Noble Phantasm is Eden Shugra Quasar, which is an AoE art attack that deals damage to all enemies, with between a 450 and 750% damage modifier, depending on level. It also increases the damage of her extra card attack by 100% for 1 turn, and increases her own NP damage for 3 turns, between 20 and 60% depending on overcharge. As an Avenger, Space Ishtar requires a ton of different materials for her ascension. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to list off the mats that she needs, and in the description of the video, I will include a link to the drop rate table so that you can see where these mats are best farmed. For level ascension, Ishtar needs 10 octuplet crystals, black grease, snake jewels, lanugos, bloodstone tears, reactor cores, scarabs, and hearts. And for skill leveling, she's going to require 10 gears and feathers, 12 spinal fluids, stakes, and bullets, and 15 aurora steel, gallstones, and eggs per skill. Space Ishtar is one of this year's most anticipated servants, and for good reason. She is a truly unique servant, both in terms of her playstyle and her capabilities, although you wouldn't be able to tell that just from looking at her stats. Ishtar has one of the most generic glass cannon stat spreads that you can find, with exceedingly high attack and very low HP, and both her star generating and base NP gain are fairly average. But as we all know, it's the skills that make the servant. And ironically enough, in Ishtar's case, despite having mediocre NP gain at first glance, it's her unique combination of skills that makes her one of the best NP spammers in the game. Specifically her third skill, Multiple Starling. This skill is a 50% NP charge that also has an 80% chance of increasing Ishtar's quick, arts, and buster card effectiveness by 20% for 3 turns. Naturally, this is Ishtar's most important skill. A 50% NP charge is one of the best skills an AoE servant can have. But what makes Space Ishtar's NP charge even better than most other servants is that she's an AoE arts servant. This type of skill is very rare for an arts servant to have because their NP already refunds a good amount of NP charge. So this means that Ishtar is easily able to loop her Noble Phantasm with little to no support, just due to the amount of refund that her NP gives her, combined with this ridiculous amount of NP charge. But the icing on the cake is that this skill also has a good chance of buffing Ishtar's cards, which in the case of the arts and quick buffs makes it even easier for her to loop. I should mention though that the buff chances are calculated separately, so it is possible to get the Buster buff but miss the arts and quick buff, which does make this skill a little less consistent. And speaking of card buffs, Space Ishtar's most unique skill is Venus Driver. It's an NP damage buff that also grants her 1 hit of invincibility and lets her change her NP card type. Changing her card type also changes the damage multiplier, so for example, Ishtar's quick Noble Phantasm does do more damage than her arts and Buster NP. In my opinion, this is the most versatile skill in the game, and it makes Space Ishtar the most flexible DPS servant in the game. Putting aside the invincibility, which is always nice to have, this is a skill that you will almost always use offensively. It lets Ishtar choose what kind of DPS she wants to be, and because it has such a high uptime, it is exceedingly consistent. If you want to use Ishtar as a Buster servant and pair her with Merlin, then she can be, and she can even be a quick servant for Scotty teams. Ishtar can basically work with any support in the game, which makes the possible team comps with her endless. The fact that this skill also buffs NP damage is just a little bit of a bonus. And finally, Ishtar has one last buff in Devil Sugar, which is basically a better charisma that also gives the party charm immunity. The charm immunity is too niche to really be useful, but giving her allies a 30% attack buff is pretty nice. Of course, the best part of the skill though is the self-attack buff, and just like the buffs on her 3rd skill and her Noble Phantasm, this buff lasts for 3 turns, and it stacks multiplicatively with those buffs to maximize her damage. Skill leveling priority for Ishtar should be her NP charge first for that increase in farming consistency, followed by her charisma for the better damage multiplier, and then her NP buff last. For her append skills, I would recommend prioritizing the NP charge first because it's the most important skill for farmers, followed by the increase to her extra card damage, and the anti-archer buff isn't really necessary and should be prioritized last. As I mentioned earlier, Space Ishtar's Noble Phantasm is an AoE arts attack that has the unique effect of increasing her extra card damage by 100% and her NP damage by up to 60% for 3 turns. The buff to extra card damage is significant and makes Brave Chains with Ishtar very potent, but the strength of this Noble Phantasm lies in its raw power. Because Ishtar has so many buffs, she can easily reach over 100% additional damage on her Noble Phantasm, and that makes it extremely strong. Even without an NP interlude, she has one of the highest damage outputs of any AoE servant, including Dante's if she switches to a quick NP. And this isn't just a single turn of burst damage either. All of Ishtar's buffs have very high uptime, and they stack multiplicatively, which means that rather than her damage falling off, her NP gets stronger the more that she uses it. Her face card damage is also very good for the same reason, so she doesn't even need to rely exclusively on NPs for damage. But by far Ishtar's best strength is her NP spam ability. That 50% NP charge skill is huge, and it allows her to be the most consistent and powerful NP looper in arts teams when she's used with premium supports like Castoria. In fact, since her NP charge is so large, she can even farm irregular enemy waves that have just 1 or 2 enemies, and she can even farm using craft essences like Black Grail because she isn't as dependent on NP refund as other traditional arts farmers like Berserker Musashi. Ishtar can even work as an NP looper in Scotty and Tamamovich teams later on, although that does require much more investment like a max limit broken kaleidoscope. But that isn't to say that Ishtar is only a servant for whales. In actuality, she also excels in free-to-play comps as well. Her ability to change her card type gives her unrivaled unrivaled versatility, so she can succeed just as well with servants like Mosh and Shakespeare. This means that at her best, Ishtar is arguably the best farmer in the game, but even for newer players who don't have top shelf SSR supports, she can still be an excellent DPS and wave clearer. Ishtar isn't perfect, however. She does have a few blemishes on her record. For one, her class doesn't do her any favors. As an Avenger, she doesn't have class advantage against 99% of enemies, which hampers her effectiveness against high HP enemy waves. So if you're planning on using her as your main farmer, she absolutely has to be NP2 or higher to overcome that weakness. Her highly offensive skill set is also a bit of an issue outside of farming teams because she lacks the utility for some boss fights. She has no way of removing buffs, weakening enemies, or piercing defense, so she does need to rely on some good supports for challenge quests. And speaking of supports, let's talk team comps. Now, outside of supports like Waver and Hans, Ishtar is probably the most flexible servant in the game, and she can fit into almost any team. That said though, she does excel in farming teams the most, specifically arts farming teams. So pair her with art servants who can improve her NP gain and her NP charge, like Tamamo, Paracelsus, and Nero Bride. Paracelsus does a good job of making up for Ishtar's inherent lack of NP gain, while Bride and Tamamo not only provide good NP charge, but powerful damage buffs as well. Scotty can also work well with Ishtar, and of course, once Castoria comes out, she'll be the best servant in the game to pair with Space Ishtar, but even without those two, Ishtar is still quite an amazing farming servant. Ishtar's Bond CE is towards the Cosmos of Reunion. It increases the party's arts, quick, and buster card effectiveness by 8%. It's a very thematic Bond CE, but unfortunately, it's not very useful on Ishtar. Instead, you should focus on CEs that give starting NP charge, and can help with farming, like Magical Girl of Sapphire, Painting Summer, Kaleidoscope, or even Black Grail, which can be useful for situations where Ishtar needs more damage, since she is still capable of looping even with Black Grail equipped. In the future, Mission Start, which comes out next year, is a good pickup since it does give starting NP charge, pure attack stats, and it also bolsters arts card effectiveness for slightly better NP gain. As for command codes, I would suggest going with a command code that gives bonus damage against servants like Linchpin of Heaven or None of a Merciful Gaze, just to help Ishtar out with DPS outside of farming teams. Overall, I believe Space Ishtar to be hands down the best farming servant in FGO. Her huge NP charge combined with her arts-oriented deck makes her one of the most consistent loopers in the game, especially once Castoria releases. Her ability to change her NP card type lets her fit into almost any team alongside any support, and she has a wide variety of buffs that have a high uptime, so her DPS is consistently strong. Keep in mind though that she does need to be at least NP2 to reach her full potential, since her class does hold her back from farming the strongest enemy waves. And her overly offensive kit does limit her utility in some challenge quests and boss fights. With that said though, Space Ishtar gets an S from me. Whether you're a free-to-play player with limited resources, or a whale looking to maximize their efficiency, Space Ishtar is your best friend. Her versatility makes her the perfect wave clearer and DPS to use with any support, while her looping consistency and high damage output gives her one of the highest ceilings for 3-turn farming teams. And those are my thoughts on Space Ishtar. But remember, ultimately the best reason to roll for her is because Rin is best girl. Well, what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over our Discord, chill with us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter. And I'll see you all in the next Servant Spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.